video, we'll be focusing on the recently concluded WTO Ministerial Conference. Now, before we move on to the details of the Ministerial Conference, let's just quickly go through the basics of WTO. Now, WTO, as you all know, stands for the World Trade Organization, and it was established in 1995, replacing its predecessor organization, which is GATT. Now, GATT stands for the General Agreement on Tariffs as well as Trade. Now, when you come to the objectives of the WTO, it is mainly to ensure that the trade happens in a free, fair as well as predictable manner, and for this, WTO acts as a public forum for the trade negotiations, it administers the trade agreements, it settles the various trade disputes, and also cooperate with the other international organizations with respect to the trade. Now, right now, WTO has about 164 member countries, and you should always remember one thing, that the WTO takes decisions by consensus. That is, the decisions are taken up by the entire membership through consensus. Now, when you come to the Ministerial Conference of WTO, you need to understand that WTO Ministerial Conference is the highest decision-making body of WTO, and it meets at least once in every 2 years, and the various member countries are being represented by their respective trade ministers or the senior officials. With respect to India, India is being represented by the Commerce Minister. And when you come to the recent WTO Ministerial Conference, we have the 9th Ministerial Conference that happened in 2013 at Bali, Indonesia. The 10th Ministerial Conference happened in 2015 at Nairobi, Kenya. And the recent Ministerial Conference happened in Buenos Aires at Argentina, and that is the 11th Ministerial Conference. Now we look into the 11th Ministerial Conference in detail. Now, before we move on to the conference as such, we need to have an understanding that what exactly was India expecting from this Ministerial Conference. Now, India expected a major development on a crucial issue, and that's called as a public stockholding for the food security purpose. Now, to have a better understanding on this issue, you need to consider certain aspects. Now, under the WTO rules, you have a multilateral agreement, and that's called as the Agreement on Agriculture. And there's a component that comes under this Agreement on Agriculture, and that's called as a domestic support measure. Now, as the term suggests, these are the support measures that are given by the respective government to the agricultural sector. Now, WTO classifies these domestic support measures mainly into three. That is, the first is the amber box measure, second is the green box measure, third is the blue box measure. Now, let's take this amber box measures. Now, as per the WTO, those measures, those support measures which comes under the amber box are considered to have a direct impact on the production of the food, and that is also considered to be trade distorting. So, since they are trade distorting, naturally it means that these support measures have to be done away with. So, that is with respect to the amber box measures which have to be gradually done away with. Second is the green box measures, and these measures mainly include those which are minimal or not trade distorting at all. So, which means that these measures can be continued. So, you can draw similarity of these two colors with respect to the traffic signal. That is, in case of the amber color of the traffic signal, it means to slow down. So, amber box means to do away with those measures that are trade distorting, and green box is similar to the green color signal, green color traffic signal, which means to go ahead. So, that is, green box measures can be continued. So, these are the two things. And third, you have another measure that is being classified as blue box measure. Now, the measures or the support measures that come under the blue box are trade distorting, but they can be or they are allowed to certain extent. Now, that particular extent is being termed as what you call it as a de minimis. And as per the WTO rules, this support should not exceed, or it can be up to 5% of the value of the production in case of the developed countries, and in case of the developing countries, it should not exceed, or it can be up to 10% of the of the value of the production. Alright, that is, with respect to the food subsidy or the support measures that comes under the blue box, that can be allowed up to 5% of the value of production for the developed countries and up to 10% of the value of the production for the developing countries. Now, how do you calculate this value of the production? It is calculated with respect to the base year, that is 1986 as well as 88. So the price etc. are being taken with respect to this base year. So what happens, you know the conditions are different from what was actually 1986, 88 as well as the present time. So the developing countries consider this particular date to be outdated or the base year to be outdated. With respect to India, India was also having apprehensions that this de minimis limit of 10% could be breached once the Food Security Act gets fully implemented. Now the Food Security Act mainly involves the procurement of the food grains from the farmers for the distribution to the population. And along with it, you need to also consider the fact that the minimum support price, which is considered to be trade distorting under the WTO rules, is all for the different food grains is also increasing on an annual basis. So what happened is that the developing countries took this issue of the public stockholding for the food security purpose for the WTO negotiations, and the developing countries were demanding either for the revision of this base year, that is 1986 to 88, or to give these developing countries an exemption on this de minimis limit. Now it was in Bali Ministerial Conference that finally a clause was settled in, and that is called as a peace clause. Now what do you mean by this peace clause? Now as per the peace clause, if any developing country breach this limit, that is the de minimis limit of 10%, they would not be challenged by the other WTO members. So that means that it is giving an exemption to the developing countries. Now it was also decided that this peace clause will continue till a permanent solution on this issue is finalized. So this was what was decided at the Bali Ministerial Conference. So what happened is that India was expecting that in this ministerial conference, that is in the 11th Ministerial Conference, the WTO members would come up with a permanent solution for the problem of public stockholding for the food security. But this didn't happen, and it's mainly because of the opposition from a major country, and that is United States. So what happened is that India was expecting a development on the issue of the public stockholding for the food security, but that did not happen. So as of now, it is a peace clause that will be in existence. So this was what was happening in the WTO Ministerial Conference. Now at a time when the existing issues were not getting finalized, there were moves by some other countries to introduce new issues to the WTO negotiations. Now what are those issues? It mainly has to do with e-commerce, investment facilitation, as well as MSMEs, and also with respect to the gender equality. Now when you come across the term e-commerce, the e-commerce issue is not that new to the WTO negotiations. Now with respect to e-commerce, you need to be aware of a moratorium that was included in Declaration on Global E-Commerce, and this declaration was adopted in the second ministerial conference in 1998. Now what is this declaration on moratorium? Now as per the declaration on the moratorium, it was agreed by the member countries that the member countries would continue the current practice of not imposing the customs duties on the electronic transmission. That is, the member countries would be refraining from imposing the customs duties on the electronic transmission. So this particular moratorium was temporary in nature, and this usually got extended every 2 years after each ministerial conference. Now what happened in this ministerial conference was that there were moves by certain countries like the United States, the European Union, Japan to change this temporary moratorium to permanent in nature, and also they were planning to introduce or formulate new rules regarding the e-commerce. Now what happened is that such moves to introduce the new issues were being vehemently opposed by certain countries, and with respect to India's stand was that let's solve the initial or the existing issues, and then we'll take up new issues. So what happened with respect to e-commerce is that the moratorium got continued for the next 2 years. So this is with respect to the new issues that were moved by an informal group of member countries, but this did not go to the WTO negotiations because due to the opposition from certain member countries. Now, to the question whether there has been any takeaways from this ministerial conference, yes, and it has to mainly do with the fishery subsidies. With respect to the fishery subsidies, the member countries made a commitment that they'll secure a deal on the fishery subsidies, especially the elimination of those subsidies that promote the overfishing, or with respect to those subsidies that promote the illegal, unregulated as well as unreported fishing by 2019, that is by the next ministerial conference. Now again, the member countries also made a commitment that they'll improve the reporting of the existing fisheries subsidies programs. Now in this issue also, there were moves by certain countries to bring in an interim solution with immediate cuts, but those moves were being resisted by countries like India as well as China. Now with the deadline of 2019, now India will be having adequate time to place in safeguards to protect the Indian fishers. So this is actually the major takeaway from the 11th Ministerial Conference. And you should also remember that this Ministerial Conference ended without a ministerial declaration, as the member countries were having a disagreement on the issue of development. So these are the main things in regard to the WTO recently concluded Ministerial Conference. You need to have an idea about where exactly this happened and what were the issues that were taken into consideration, and with respect to the peace clause and also the new issues that came in. So that's it. Thank you.